Basically, there's some class changes. There's buffs to lethality and nerfs to Courage of the Colossus, and then buffs and nerfs to various other champions. Okay, so let's start off with the fact that Warwick is getting a rework. Um, Warwick rework is going to be really cool. There's a bunch of stuff out there. You can go to the patch notes yourself, click all the links. Warwick, in my opinion, if you want to jump into Warwick in 7.2 and start playing the champion, if you want to start doing well with the champion, I think you should primarily build tank and add a little bit of damage. In my opinion, the proper build is things like Cinderhulk into Titanic Hydra into Spirit Visage. We know that movement speed is an important stat for him. Ghost may or may not be better than Flash. I'm not sure, but I think it's a close choice, and we'll figure out in the first week or two which one's better. But I really don't think the correct build is like Blood Razor into Ruin King into Wit's End. I think it can work, but I think you have to be really, really, really smart about how you play the game because Warwick is a fairly slow frontliner who wants to heal himself several times throughout the fight, and that doesn't work unless you're tanky. I think his best build is tank with Titanic Hydra. I might be wrong, that's what it seems to be. So if you want to jump into Warwick, you can look at all those resources, and that's my rundown of what the champion I think should be. Now let's jump into Akali. Now, Akali got small buffs. Actually, one thing I'm going to try to do is do this and show you guys how the champion's been doing and to see if the buffs and nerfs are warranted. I'm using lolalytics.com. I think it's a very good website that does a really good job of data aggregation. And we can see that her win rate in top lane is about 50%. Her win rate in mid lane is about 48%. She's not a good jungler. And that's fine. So she's, reasonably successful as a champion. Not amazing. That's okay. Gunblade's obviously a major item for her, and one of the things that's happening in this patch is we are nerfing Gunblade, which I think is part of the reason we're buffing her ult AP ratio. Basically, people who are winning are usually maxing. Some are maxing E. Actually, top laners typically max E, but often you're seeing max Q. Anyway, nothing too special about this with the Akali stuff. We're just going to move on. But basically, I think more than anything else, this R buff makes up for the fact that Gunblade's getting nerfed, and she is slightly weak, but I don't know, it's fairly minor, it's not a big deal. Next champion up is Darius, and Darius is really interesting. He has a nerf that doesn't matter and a nerf that does matter. So the nerf that doesn't matter is this change to his passive. Basically, between levels 1 and 13, he's getting 10 less total attack damage or bonus attack damage off of 5 stacking his passive. Now, I want to point something out, by the way, on this nerf, which is I did math. That's why I think I'm going to do special with the rundown here. This is right his passive, like his level, his old passive bonus, his new passive bonus, and the fact that it's nerfed by 10 AD. But look over here at how much attack damage he normally has, right? Normally he has between 55 to 140 base attack damage, and so when you add it up together, you're getting like really small, like 4 to 10% total attack damage nerfs, and that's not even counting runes and masteries, which we know Darius will bring some of. So the passive nerf doesn't change a whole lot. It only lowers his total attack damage by 10 when he's already got 140 to spare. So it's not exactly insane. It's not exactly a huge nerf that does a whole lot to him, but it does exist, and sometimes you might find it useful. The actual change to Decimate is actually a bigger deal. You can see that the whole point of the Darius Q is that you're supposed to get into abject melee range, and if that happens, you don't get chunked quite as hard. But really, by and large, it's good Dariuses don't let this happen to them very much, and this will have an effect, but I think it's actually hard to be the beneficiary of it playing against Darius. So both these I think will end up being small nerfs. And to point it out, Darius actually wins a lot of games. This is platinum and higher statistics, and he's got a 52% win rate. So Darius is actually very effective as a champion. Right, he's bad against people that can kite him like Kayle and Quinn, no surprise here. People who are better all-inning like Riven, who can also remain on that melee range, obviously a big deal. But right, you're getting a Black Cleaver going tanky and whatnot. But I want to point out that if you are feeling the nerfs and you feel like you're not doing very well in the champion, it's worth pointing out that you should, well, it's going to be interesting because Courage of the Colossus is getting nerfed. But you can see the win rate difference between Courage of the Colossus and Fervor of Battle. And we still see people doing things like Thunderlords and Storm Raiders, which aren't quite as powerful as Fervor. So if you feel like you're being a little bit less effective, make sure you're kind of picking the right keystones here, which is definitely going to be 12.018 and kind of moving on from there. Pretty small, I think. Pretty small nerfs. I think it'll make his hard matchups even harder. People like Riven and stuff, they can get on top of him. And that's okay. I don't mind people having hard matchups and easy matchups. But he was seemingly deserving of the nerfs. Gragas, just some minor buffs. Basically, he has 3 more armor when clearing through the jungle, which is a pretty big deal. It's an extra damage reduction, essentially, and more healing through his passive. Basically, Gragas is running out of health in the jungle, and you can see that statistically his win rates weren't very good. He's a bit weaker as support, a bit weaker as a mid laner, a bit weaker as a top laner. Jungle is his best role, and the flat armor and the healing will, help us quite a bit. And overall, he was just a fairly weak champion, and that's just how he was. And obviously he was a courage user. Some people were going Thunderlords, which probably was the mid laners who were trying to be a burst mage and weren't quite as effective. Not a lot to say really. Just overall, Gragas wasn't all that powerful, so he's more durable in the jungle, and he should feel a little bit better about that now. I don't think Gragas will suddenly be a meta jungler anymore. I don't think he's going to suddenly be insane, but it'll feel better to play him. It'll affect all his roles to a certain extent. And, maybe I'm underestimating the power of this passive buff on his laning phases, because that actually just might be insane. Graves, really, really, really minor change. This could have been listed as a bug fix. But basically now his Q and his R refresh true grit against champions and monsters. Okay, that's nice. And the thing is, he was doing fine already. You can see his win rate, 49%. 80 carry right around there, jungle right around there. A little bit weaker as a top laner, which is deflating the win rate a little bit. Not a huge deal, but Graves seems to be reasonably effective as a champion. We even see him in pro play. He's actually one of the meta junglers in professional play. He's not the top tier jungler, but he's into that solid B tier where if Kha'Zix and Rengar and Lee Sin are gone, you start to see Graves played a fair bit. And again, if you don't feel like you're being quite effective, you can take a quick look at proper rune and mastery usage. You can notice that Storm Raiders and Thunderlords are winning a whole lot more than Fervor and Warlord's Bloodlust. Storm Raiders is a really low sample size, so it's kind of hard to say for sure exactly how good this really is because of sample bias. But it's worth noting that if you are jungling, Double-Edged Sword is just the best for clear speed, and you should be going Greenfather's Gift as a jungler, because you're going to walk through bush when ganking, you're going to walk through bush when jungling, and it buffs your clear speed. Like, Graves is actually an above-average champion if you just think about actually running Greenfather's Gift. Talk about it in Runes and Masteries, but if you find yourself slightly ineffective, there's some easy pickups here that are useful. And anytime you see these like low win rate, 3% use rate masteries, people should realize maybe I shouldn't be doing this anymore and switching off. Thunderlords and Storm Raiders, I think, clearly are the better ones on him. That's all fine. All right, so Graves got really, really minor buffs. It's not going to mean a whole lot. Katarina started seeing a whole lot of use recently. Katarina mains are still incredibly effective on the champion. The average Katarina is still not amazing, but basically she's getting 2 nerfs this patch. Shunpo is getting nerfed by 0.15 total attack damage. Those exist, right? She's 100 AD by late game. It means something. Her Shunpo does a little bit less damage, so her all-ins are a little bit weaker, especially because she resets it several times in a fight. And she's getting Gunblade nerfed a little bit, so champion was a bit strong. She was seen an appropriate Mountain Pro play, right? It's a pretty minor nerf. It's a love tap. I don't know. I don't think she was the most important mid laner to nerf, but for good Katarinas as champion was bonkers. And I think Katarina's a champion that will probably see several small nerfs over the next several months as people get better at the champion and realize how insane she is. Again, she's not the S tier mid laner, but really good Katarinas are insane. So it's worth kind of thinking about a little bit. Now, next up is Lulu, and Lulu, I think, was a pretty good buff. What's interesting is Lulu is a weak mid laner and a good support, and so we can see, okay, her passive got more damage. Now, this is a little bit misleading. These damage numbers are slightly misleading because it now increases every level rather than every other level. So the buff is more than you think. It's not just +6 and then, randomly becomes +12 by the end. This is actually what the buffs look like to the champion. As we scroll in on Lulu and we zoom in to the appropriate size. So her old damage, right, 9, 9, 21, 21, 33, 33, you're now getting these buffs in sooner, and so you're getting 6 or 12 bonus damage every time. And as a percentage, it's really massive, right? At level 2, Pix went from doing 9 damage to 21 damage, which I bet you didn't think about that it did literally double damage now after the buffs. So Lulu's level 2 all-in got much stronger. Now granted, it's 12 damage per auto. It's not like suddenly people are getting one-shot. But that is relevant. 12 damage per auto attack is good. It's quite strong. And you can see that the primary effect of the buffs here are, level 2, level 4, level 6 are very substantial damage gains. And I mean, it's always, 612, 612, 612 the whole way through, but relative to the other champions in her lane, these are actually pretty big. So Lulu, I think, gained quite a bit with those buffs specifically, especially in the laning phase. And it's worth noting that basically she is still a much stronger support than she is a mid laner. If we look over, ooh, I didn't actually look at Katarina. That's fine. We knew she was effective, right? 50% win rate. But if we move down and we look at Lulu's statistics here on Lolalytics, you can see that her win rate and support was slightly below average, and her win rate in mid lane is kind of mediocre. And unfortunately, it's always been weird because mid Lulu's always had a very low win rate when she was dominant in pro play. She's always been a sort of very particular champion in that regard. Um, so, that's kind of interesting to look at. Uh, that basically pros value mid Lulu more than win rate suggests, and that's fine. But she'll probably never hit 50% win rate for your general solo queue play and actually be a not broken pro tier pick. And you just have to kind of know that as a Lulu player. That's just kind of what your life is going to be like. And support could, again, use the small buffs right here. Someone in chat briefly asked about win rate stuff and what's actually optimal. Of course, Windspeaker's Blessing, I think, should be the thing you choose. I think it just is slightly better than Thunderlords. You can see the win rate here is a 1% difference. That's kind of nice. Right, some nice durability stuff for her. I really don't recommend going for like a damage-focused Lulu. It's not really the point of the champion. And win rate rise, we can see that she's got a mix of marks that can be good. Hybrid Pen actually being one of the best ones. Now, granted, this is mid and support grouped together. Take it with a grain of salt if you need to, but I don't want to jump too much into Rune and Masters for the champion. I'm going to talk about it getting buffed and you playing it appropriately. The Glitter Lance buffs actually, I think, are more helpful for mid than for support. Now that you have to cast more of it to get through your laning phase, the mana buffs just make her lane a little bit better. Anyway, Lulu could use the buffs, and yeah, that'll help a little bit. Master Yi got several really cool changes. I like all of these actually. So, Double Strike now works like Lucian passive. Basically, if you were going to last hit a monster, the other one will now swing and hit something else. Now, this is something that really good Master Yi players were already trying to optimize, where they would understand, okay, I'm these many auto attacks away, I'll hit the small wolf once, and then I'll go back to the big wolf, and it was just kind of annoying to have to do it, honestly. Especially because as a jungler, you're supposed to be looking around the map and finding what your next play is, not micromanaging every third auto attack. So even for challenger level Master Yis, like Cowsep himself, will probably get some benefit out of this, where he doesn't have to micromanage Double Strike anymore. He can look around the map a little bit more often and not have to worry about these optimizations. The other quick buff is really nice for Meditate. So one is it will I mean, you can read it here, right? But it leaves Wuju Style and Highlander on. Normally, if you're like, okay, I've got to block this damage output here, you don't lose out on your buff durations, which I think is really, really nice. I think it's just very helpful. It's just nice to have. And also, so not only do you keep your E and R on for longer, but you even charge up your passive for it. So this is nice because in the jungle, and I'm not an experienced Master Yi player, but theoretically in the jungle, if you are trying to heal up between camps, like if you're picking sort of a risky clear and you want to meditate between, raptors and going on a Gromp or something, and you want to meditate, you can charge up Double Strike for that. So that now when you go to Gromp, you get that extra attack really early, and you don't lose quite as much clear speed by meditating to heal in the jungle. And again, I'm not sure how much that actually even happens, but these are kind of just feel-good buffs. They're not actually huge win rate increases. And the thing is, Master Yi is a champion. His win rates aren't exactly stellar. He's obviously better as a jungler than he is as a top laner, which I think no one's surprised about. But if you don't find that you're effective enough, it's worth pointing out, by the way, that Fervor of Battle is significantly better than Warlords and Thunderlords. And we're seeing like 12% of Keystone choices are suboptimal. So, move on to Fervor, pick up slightly better, pick a slightly better Keystone option. It might make you slightly more effective as a champion. It's really minor, to be fair, but that will actually buff you a bit as well if you just pick the right Keystone. All right, so Nidalee got some buffs. Nidalee got a lot of substantial ones, actually. So a lot of different changes. So we're going to talk about the durability changes. She gained 29 HP, and she gained 10 to 20 extra healing every time she casts E. What this actually really helps is that bad Nidalees are healthier. Now, yesterday on stream I talked about this, where there's a sort of push to make jungles slightly less mechanically complex. There are still mechanically complex junglers, but the primary skill set tested by being a jungler is your map awareness and your pathing, not so much your micromanagement. And so as a result, Nidalee gets a bit more for the baseline performance where, oh, I took too much damage from Gromp, well, I healed myself for more than, Moon did when he jungled. Okay, so it bridges the gap a little bit. I think that's wise. She's a bit tankier because, well, she's got to go into melee range to do stuff. Otherwise, the actual traps are interesting because she can actually set traps for people, right? She can set traps at like the entrance to her Gromp or something, and now when someone tries to steal the buff away, it goes, oh, I got seed instead of dodging the trap. And so there's actually a fair bit of buff here for her as a controller. A smart Nidalee actually can get a lot out of this by not letting you know you're going to get smacked by a trap. Of course, at the same time, someone can red trinket or Scryer's Bloom or Pink Ward your traps, and those can die. So there's different counterplay here. I would say in general, the fact that they are invisible but can die is on average a buff to the champion. I would say it's on average a buff. There are places where it's worse, places where it's better. On average, the general game, I'd say it's better for her. The nerf, though, is max number of traps. This means a little bit for her early clearing, because she normally put down more than 4 traps when initially jungling, and now she's capped at 4. So this actually slightly lowers the high end of what a good Nidalee could do in the jungle. It's actually, I've still seen clears where you start Q and not W. And if you're starting Q, then this doesn't even change you in almost any way in the jungle. But, and because I haven't seen Nidalee in a while, I don't know what's actually best anymore. But this will probably push you slightly towards a Q start. Really minor stuff overall. I think Nidalee needs more than this to be super effective. I think she's still a bit weak. There were further changes actually that got pulled because they were deemed a bit too risky, and we'll probably see over the next couple of months a few more Nidalee buffs aimed around things like this, where it's just going to make her a little bit safer to clear the jungle through, and we might see that get a bit better. I mean, we can see overall as a champion, she's losing a lot of games. 44% win rate, super low. I mean, she's getting blasted in mid, so that's actually really hurting her win rate. And top as well, she's not doing very well. But she is a weak jungler. She'll probably get more buffs. I don't think these changes are going to make her suddenly the best jungler in the game, and we'll probably see more happen in a little bit. All right, now we go to Yasuo. Now Yasuo is another change where I did a bunch of math for. We'll pull that up in a second, but basically. So the logic is that if you start Emax, you have insane mobility and you have insane dueling damage. And so the damage got nerfed really hard. It went from 70 to 150 and became 60 to 110. These are very, very large nerfs. It has a bonus 0.2 AD ratio, which doesn't make up for it. So let's look over at the Yasuo changes. Okay, so let me zoom to the appropriate level. Okay, here we are. So this is what's worth pointing out. You used to max E first. So level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, level 5, right? So this was the old base damage. This is the old damage when you had max stacks of E. This is the new base damage and the new base damage with your max stack of E. And this is the total amount of attack damage or damage on the skill you gain from the AD ratio. Now, it's worth noting the AD ratio does not get multiplied by the stacking mechanic. So this is just how much total gain. So it's worth pointing out that if you're just using a 1 tap of E, this is how much damage you're losing this is the build I'm expecting you to have, by the way. And then if you're max stacking it, this is how much damage you're losing. You can see these are very substantial nerfs. These are very substantial nerfs to the E damage. Yasuo is intended to be nerfed with these changes. This obviously hurts less if you're not maxing E anymore, and in fact you might not because you're really only gaining, 10 to 15 damage by ranking it up. 60 to 90 becomes 100 to 150. Of course, you're getting the mobility still. You may still want points in E, but you are probably going to Q max. You're probably going to Q max now as a Yasuo, even though E max was more popular. This means you will be less mobile, but it means you'll have more Q damage. If you're not maxing E, this nerf is less hurtful because the damage really to the ability was on rank up more so than on anything else. But either way, it's still going to be a nerf to Yasuo. A fairly small one because he has a lot more damage elsewhere, but it will be a nerf to the champion. You can see his win rate, pretty reasonable. It's in the high 49s. I mean, he's not objectively winning all his games, but this ban rate is 46%, right? He's getting banned by everyone all the time. People don't want to play against him. They consider him abusive. And so that's a lot of the reason for the nerf is that even if mathematically he's not winning a whole ton of games, he's sure as hell frustrated to play against, and so the E nerf allows you to say, okay, well, the Yasuo, if he's going for damage, he's less mobile. If he's going for mobility, he has less damage. And if you feel too hurt by these nerfs, it's worth pointing out that Fervor of Battle is by far his best Keystone Mastery. It wins 3% more often than Warlord's Bloodlust. It wins 8% more often than Thunderlord's Decree. So if you found out you got nerfed, pick a better keystone. You'll feel better. All right, next up were lethality changes. Now, this is entirely a math change, right? This is hard for a lot of people to appreciate. It's hard to know exactly how good it is. Basically, what happens is lethality gives you 62% of its value at level 1 instead of 43% of its value at level 1, and you get the rest of it over the course of time. It's worth pointing out, by the way, that even though they say it immediately grants 40 to 60, it actually grants this 0.22 per lethality at level 1 because you're hitting level 1 champions. So it's a slight misnomer. Not really. I mean, it's not really a big deal. It's a very small difference. And so I did the math based on Youmuu's Ghostblade. So I looked at Youmuu's Ghostblade and I said, okay. And I picked the most common bot lane champion, which is Caitlyn, and I said, if you're running armor seals, heals how much armor you have. All the math stuff on the right-hand side, I didn't include it here, but basically, this is how much different penetration you get, right? You get, let's say around level 7, you complete a Youmuu's Ghostblade, you have 2.4 more armor pen than before. And before, like a Youmuu's gave you, 7, 8, 9, 10. You actually got more damage amp as time went on. It actually scaled sort of better than the Caitlyn's armor. This is now a much softer scale, right? You're seeing this is 110 to 111 and change. So you're getting, for buying a Youmuu's, you're doing 10% more damage to a Caitlyn at all phases of the game. And just as a factor of what it was before, right? Comparing old amp to the new amp, you're getting, a 1 to 3% damage amp in the early game compared to what you were getting before. You're doing more damage than before. So you're getting a little bit more. It's still going to be nice. You're going to be a bit stronger. Again, it's worth pointing out that the way lethality works is it is comprised of your opponent's champion level. That means if you're a level 5 Lucian with a Youmuu's and you face up against level 9 Lee Sin, you are getting more armor pen against him. But the fact that it basically got buffed for early game buffs all the lethality users against marksman. Right, the difference in buff gets smaller as time goes on, but it's a big early game buff to the assassin types. And that's Youmuu's specifically. The other items fall into a similar line, of course. That's how all that works out. Scrolling down, Duskblade got some more base damage. It's nice because Duskblade also has a bunch of damage based on how much lethality it has. Yes, this buffs it overall, and it's an even better item for Kha'Zix, although Kha'Zix wasn't really buying the item that much. But what it really does is it helps Duskblade it allows it to be your first item, because now more of its damage is in the base damage and less on the lethality scaling. So you can feel a bit better buying it first and getting that chunk of damage. Edge of Night, small buff as well. This is nice. This won't break your stealth anymore. This is basically a Kha'Zix and Twitch and Evelyn buff, although Evelyn would not run this item. Shaco, etc. Right? These are just nice. It's just a good change. It makes sense. And now it's on a good third of the time, right? The spell shield I think lasts for 10 seconds and the cooldown's for 30. So you can feel really good about anytime you're thinking about ganking, you can pop the cooldown and go for the play. And if it doesn't work, it's just going to be on again. And so it's another item where you can feel good about buying this item and say, yeah, I'm going to be able to use a spell shield almost every time. And getting a Banshee's Veil shield for your gank when you're trying to 1v1 a Syndra and now she can't land her stun on you is a really big deal. So it's just a small nerf, or sorry, a small buff. Nice to have. Now we have Hextech Gunblade. And Gunblade received very small changes. It's basically now got a lower base damage, and it's Akali, Katarina, and Corki. Yep, those are the primary beneficiaries. Corki, very strong as well. Not getting direct nerfs, but does get nerfed via Gunblade. And I did math on this. I did math to say, hey, let's look at Gunblade damage. There we go, that's scrolled properly. And you can see the damage nerf is actually pretty moderate. I actually forgot to include the AP ratio. I meant to, and I'm sorry, I just spaced. I meant to put it in the math. So the actual value of this nerf goes down slightly. It has a 0.3 AP ratio and has 80 ability power on it. And so a 75 damage nerf when you've got, 24 more damage in both these numbers is a smaller percentage. So the nerf is not quite as bad as these numbers look because the active on its own already does more than 250 because it feeds into its own ability power ratio. But you can see, it's a moderate damage nerf, right? You are losing 75 to 4 damage based on rank, and this is meaningful, right? This is meaningful. The fact that Akali is going to get it around, this level, she needs to get that damage back from her ultimate somehow, and Katarina's just losing this and her attack damage ratio, and yeah, your burst damage goes down if you're a Gunblade user, and in most of the cases that was reasonable to do. Most of the Hextech Gunblade users were overpowered, and then we buffed Akali, so, it's fine. Redemption, right? Less health on it, obviously a meaningful nerf. More mana regen. The entire point was to make Redemption feel more like a Janna item and less like a Thresh item. Now, we realized that with Redemption being overpowered, it was part of why people are playing mage supports all the time, or I should say enchanter supports all the time, the Karmas and the Sorakas and the Jannas of the world. They're the most effective champions, and we know that. But, really Braum should not be buying this, and the farther we can push it away from him, the less likely he is to buy the item, and that's generally going to be effective. And in fact, we're buffing Knight's Vow as a result afterwards. But it's also worth pointing out that okay, this math on the heal, what does it really mean? And I did math for that. So the redemption heal, you can see the effectiveness is actually pretty substantially different. It starts out really low. Obviously, you're not finishing the item until maybe level 8 or 9, so you're looking at this is probably where it's starting. You're probably not. I mean, literally, no one is ever going to have level 1 redemption. A lot of these numbers can be completely ignored. We're going to say level 8, right? So around here, you're seeing 50 less healing per teammate. You're seeing an 82% effectiveness per teammate. And this is, okay, this is a small nerf, right? These numbers look really scary, but they're not accurate numbers because you're never going to see these numbers. So you're looking around here for the primary effectiveness. It's also worth keeping in mind that even though it equals out, almost never, well, it's based on your target's level, not on your level as a champion. So you're still going to heal that level 18 Yasuo if he's ever team fighting with you for full value. It's not really what level you're at. So you're looking at sort of this moderate range of numbers where it's 80 to 90% is effective. Obviously still a good item, just not quite as amazing. And the Knight's Vow gets buffed because Knight's Vow was a little bit weak. That's totally fine. Probably needs a bit of help. That's okay. Make that happen. Knight's Vow could use the help. It's worth pointing out, by the way, that we've seen some pro top laners bring out Knight's Vow on tank team fighters like a Maokai or even a Nautilus, because it turns out that getting damage reduction to a teammate and healing based on mid Corki's damage output is a really, really, really good tank stat. That when your teammate does 2,000 damage in a team fight and you heal for 12% of that, that's 240 health. It pays for the cost inefficiency, and you get a tank for your teammate. So it's a really quite effective item. It's pretty gold efficient, and again, we saw that tank supports weren't doing very well, like the Brahms and the Alishas of the world, so this is a nice buff to say, hey, maybe look at the item a little bit more. This should feel a little bit better to buy, and, should feel okay. Similarly, Ivy Equinox, actually, basically it gets the 100 gold cost that Knight's Vow got right here, and it goes into Ivy Equinox, but now it gets some cooldown reduction. It's actually a little bit hard to get CDR as a tank support because you just don't have the items, really. It's just not quite as easy to get the items that you want here. Your glyphs often, they want to be magic resist instead of CDR, things like that. You don't quite have the same luxuries. So 10 CDR for 100 gold is an incredibly good bargain. This is a buff to the item. 10 CDR is great, great, great to have. It's a buff. And, if you're not buying Redemption because of how much it got nerfed for tank supports because you don't care about this stat and this value got nerfed a little bit, then maybe you go Knight's Vow Ivy Equinox and you feel a little bit better about yourself. You're a little bit tankier and life's a little bit easier for the Braum supports. I don't know if it's going to make tank supports suddenly be 100% viable and everyone's going to play them all the time. I think we do need to see nerfs to Malzahar. I think we do need to see nerfs to Zyra, but we'll see. Ardent Censer, minor buffs. These aren't huge. Again, it's based on target's level, so if you're an underleveled support, it's not that bad. It's obviously only a buff at all times. It can never be worse. So this is just kind of nice. And it's buffing items that aren't redemption. It's trying to buff the other items, say, okay, redemption's a little overpowered, we'll nerf it, and we'll buff the other options. And the goal is to make support items a bit better, right? Mid Lulu's not going to be buying this item, most likely. This is not going to be happening usually. So it could happen for like a mid Karma maybe. Okay, sure, maybe support mids get a bit better, right? And if these become the right items, then hey, I'm okay with mid supports being good, but now there's some other items to buy, and also, by the way, like this buffs Karma without buffing Zyra support, and so it's all shifting the power a little bit away from mage supports. A couple of different nudges. Now giving a Twitch 35% attack speed and 35 life on hit with a Hurricane and his ultimate on is a lot of health back. And to be honest, one thing that's worth pointing out as I dive on this item a little bit further is statistically on a champion like Twitch, Fervor of Battle is actually his best keystone. He wins more with that than Warlords, but obviously having some kind of lifesteal or life on hit is nice. And if you have a Twitch who's got Fervor and deals 1,000,000 damage, and you rush and get him an Ardent Censer and Karma Shield him, and he heals for 80 health per auto attack, that's better than almost any champion ever gets to lifesteal. Like, that's insane health back. So, um, this item has just kind of repeatedly been getting buffs, and I feel like it's very, very strong. It's an attack speed buff. It's a health drain. It should be very good. Minor buffs to Chalice of Harmony, of course. Why not? Let's get some more MR. And, of course, Chalice mostly goes into defensive items, right? Athene's is a shielding support item, and a Lulu mid item, and a Karma mid item. Mikhail's Crucible is a shielding support item, and hey, it gives them tank stats. So, right, more support item buffs to champions that aren't just straight up Zyra and Malzahar. So it's a small thing. The really nice thing is it goes straight against the Zyra too. If I'm Lulu and I buy Athene's Unholy Grail, I get 5 MR against that jerk Zyra. So it helps a little bit, right? It's a little bit nice. I don't think it changes the entire landscape, but there are about 7 or 8 changes just in this patch that tries to push everything together a little bit and push you away from mage supports and push you towards other good things. Okay, so we made some jungle changes. Basically, the initial spawn is pushed back 3 seconds. The reason being, this whole thought is that junglers feel overpowered. They got nerfs to how much XP they could gain in the first couple of clears in the previous patch. This nerfs how much they can get a leash. What's nice, actually, is it makes Challenger and Bronze look a little bit closer together. Because in Bronze, you weren't getting leashes anyway. And so now, like, that poor Master Yi, whose teammates are too dumb to leash for him, is in the same boat as the Gold Master Yi, whose teammates are just want to get to lane. It slows them down, right? It slows down junglers. They're literally behind by 3 seconds, and then more by not having 3 seconds of a leash. You still can leash. Like when I leash for 7 auto attacks when I play bot lane. 7 auto attacks. That's like 9 seconds. I can still give my teammate 6 seconds of a leash, but that's 6 instead of 9, and he's still got to do the rest of it himself. So it is a nerf. It is a nerf. It does make this harder. It does make it slower. There's even less chance to poach a camp now. You still can leash. Keep in mind, like, this is not so pushed back that you're never going to leash again. I leash for like 9 seconds when I play on live. Now I leash for 6. But this slows down junglers. They're taking more damage. This does have a side effect of hurting slow clearing junglers more. To be fair, that does happen now, because if you're Lee Sin, you can full clear the jungle with refillable potion and no leash at all. As Sejuani or Mumu gets a little bit more difficult. But the nice thing is that tank junglers never wanted to do Gromp anyway, right? They wanted to go to Raptors anyway. And so Gromp got a little bit more difficult to do, right? The fast clearing junglers liked Gromp and liked Krug. The slow clearing junglers took Wolves and Raptors because they were tanks. They were tank clearers, and they AoE'd those things down. So it slightly hurts those guys again. That okay, yes, the Lee Sin clears his blue buff faster, but at least the Gromp hurts him back, and he loves the Krugs, but at least they hurt him back a little bit. But basically, the jungle is a little bit more damaging. Again, I think all roles got hated on. I think they got hated on equally, though, because of the Gromp and Krug changes. And then also the Honey Fruit gets pushed back another full minute, which actually affects laners quite a bit as well. It was really nice at 5 minutes shoving the wave and getting free healing and going back to lane. It was something that I tried to use when I could. Also, if you didn't know when Honey Fruit spawned, by the way, it's between 6 and 6:30, so keep that in mind. Right before the buffs respawn, look for Honey Fruit. Right when mid laners hit level 6, they can look for Honey Fruit. FYI, if you didn't know, that's the timing now. Rift Scuttles eat Honey Fruit, because why not? Really minor change, of course. And then here's the other big change, Courage of the Colossus. Now, I realize this does nerf tank junglers, right? It's another nerf to... Well, it's a nerf to tanks in general. Tank junglers may need help. That's, worth understanding that might just be true. But Courage of the Colossus is a very mathy change. Okay, the shield duration is down by 1 second, and now the base shield is cut into about 1/3, and it's now per ally, or per enemy. Well, what does this mean? Well, let's tell you. Okay, so to explain it, I looked at Maokai's base stats. Okay? And I did a whole bunch of numbers, like on my Excel sheet, there's a whole bunch more columns. What I'm going to bring it up to is just this part of it. Okay, because there's 2 parts to the healing. There's 2 parts to the shield, I should say. There is a base shield based on who's around me, and I'll bring that up again, right? There's a base shield that used to be 10 to 180, and is now 3 to 54 times number of enemy champions. And it was 5% of your max health, also times the number of enemy champions. So that 5% times number of enemies did not change. 5% max health times number of enemies did not change. What did change is the fact that now your one-on-one shield, especially in the early game, got a bit weaker. So you have to compare based on not only what level you are, but also how many opponents are around you. So we go back to the diagram here, and we see that obviously, when there's 3 people around me, it's basically the same shield. This is practically identical. Obviously, it's basically the same. Also worth pointing out that the shields get so big because of how high level you are when 4 and 5 people are around that the shield buff is not even that large, right? At level 1, it's 3% bigger. Who gives a crap? But like, even a level 18 Maokai with 5 people around, it's a 12% larger shield. And to be honest, you weren't killing the whole shield anyway. And to be honest, it's still falling off a second earlier anyways. This is probably still a nerf, even in large team fights. This is probably still a nerf, even in large team fights, because you're not going to get as much shielding because of the duration nerf. Probably. Obviously, in lane, it's much weaker. At level 1, you can kind of see that early game, the max health scaling kind of overtook the base shield value. And then as time goes on, your max health doesn't scale quite as hard as the base value does. And so if you're a level 13 Maokai in a one-on-one and you W someone, you're getting a half value shield. This is super nerf for the laning phase. And to be fair, we were already seeing champions like Nautilus and champions like Poppy were going Grasp of the Undying in the laning phase anyway. But it's worth pointing out there is a now much starker difference between what you're getting in your lane matchup and what you're getting later on. Now, it's worth pointing out that this is a biased stat a little bit. All these numbers should push toward 100% because items exist and runes and masteries exist and things like that. Right? Because more of the total shield value will be based on your max HP, which is affected by getting a Warmogs and a Randuin's and a Sunfire Cape and scaling health seals and masteries and all the other things. So all these numbers are going to be pushed towards 100% in the real world. But if you're in a runeless game where the only mastery you have is this is Maokai's numbers, this is what you're looking at. The numbers are a bit squished in the real world, but it's still a pretty good situation here. And if you want to know the numbers of your other champions, look them up. You can do the math yourself. It's not too hard to do this. Now, Ghost got a small nerf. This is actually interesting. This is actually a nerf to team fighting mids. It's another systemic nerf to types of champions that are overwhelmingly popular. Ryze and Cassiopeia when they're not running cleanse and things like that. It's also, interestingly enough, this is a small nerf to Ashe AD carry. The reason being, the opportunity cost for running cleanse is now lower. It's really small. Like, to be real, this is not going to like suddenly make Ashe disappear. But because it takes 2 seconds to get all your move speed with Ghost, Ghost is a weaker spell. And so if you're Zed saying, I'm going to catch you, I'm going to one-shot you, Cassio can't ghost away quite as easily. Really minor. But hey, this is a small nerf. 2 team fight mids that were very, very prevalent. We'll see if it means anything, really. It's small, to keep in mind. It's a small nerf, but it slightly nudges team fight mids down. So I'm gonna skip through the changes that I don't think mean anything for your average play. There's of course a lot more going on. There's new features with the League client update. There's new stuff with the video highlighting. Rotating game modes when coming up. That's cool. Queues seem fine. There's only a couple bug fixes I thought actually mattered for gameplay. This is a big one. Inconsistencies with control wards revealing and disabling wards. My understanding of what this means is with the preseason changes, when control wards came out, their reveal radius was unintentionally nerfed compared to what pink wards had. This meant that control wards very often could not reveal an entire Baron pit, and this meant that control wards put in the side brushes to either side of mid lane would not see all the way through the brush anymore. You'd have to put them pretty far up towards the middle. I believe what this means, and I could be wrong, but I believe what this means is now the range is much greater. They will reveal wards much more easily, and there's an overall buff to control wards. They'll spot wards more easily. This might end up being a moderately successful nerf to Zyra. I don't know what the cap on her seeds was supposed to be. I don't remember. I remember old Zyra, the cap was 4, but that was a long time ago before the rework and she got the new passive, so I don't know if those numbers are accurate anymore. I don't know. This might end up being a substantial nerf if this cap is felt every game, if there are many less seeds out in your laning phase. I'm not sure, but it might be. This means almost nothing. This was actually pretty inconsistent, so it didn't mean very much. Most of these didn't mean very much overall. Yeah, and the rest of these are all just very much just generic sort of chroma and visualization stuff. So that's it for that. And that is my rundown of patch 7.2. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that. It was actually quite a bit longer than I thought it would be, but we got through it all, and I thought it was successful and fun and happy, and all is well. So let me